She was my wife's best friend for years. I never thought I'd be attracted to her. But then one stupid night after a backyard barbecue, I crossed a line I can't uncross. And the worst part? My wife found out. Not because I told her, but because of a message I forgot to delete. Mike stood at the far end of the backyard, a cold beer still in his hand, but his eyes were locked on the wooden deck where Jenna sat, draped in a light sweater, laughing brightly with Lisa. Music drifted from the Bluetooth speaker, something by Fleetwood Mac, but his mind was completely blank. All that remained was the image of Jenna, her wavy blonde hair, long legs crossed, and those eyes that kept sneaking glances his way before quickly looking away, like a private song playing just for him. Midsummer in Chicago had a strange kind of atmosphere. The heat was just enough to make everyone dress lighter, drink more, and, if they weren't careful, slip into something they couldn't come back from. Mike never imagined that a casual backyard barbecue could be the beginning of something so dangerous. People were laughing, grilling, drinking. Lisa, his wife, was always the perfect host, especially when their old college gang got together. Mike used to enjoy these gatherings, but ever since Jenna moved back to Chicago after her divorce, things had shifted. She started showing up to parties with that mischievous look in her eyes, and the way she'd lightly touch Mike's arm during conversation, it was just friendly, just polite, or at least that's what he told himself at first. "Can you grab me another sparkling water, Mike?" Jenna called out as she stood and started walking toward him. Lisa was in the kitchen arranging a fruit platter, and the rest of the group was too busy arguing over who was winning beer pong to notice. Yeah, of course," Mike replied, his voice a bit rough. He stepped over to the small cooler by the patio, opened it, trying not to notice the bare skin just visible beneath Jenna's dress, as she bent down to talk to the neighbor's dog that had wandered into the yard. When Jenna reached for the can of water, her fingertips brushed the back of his hand. Tiny touch, but for Mike it felt electric. No one saw, but his heart skipped a beat, and in that moment, amid the music, the smell of grilled meat, and the overlapping laughter, Mike knew something had shifted. He hadn't done anything wrong. Not yet. But the line he and Jenna were standing near felt razor thin. And once you cross it, can you ever go back? Mike Richardson, 42, was the typical suburban North Chicago guy. Polo shirts, SUV, Saturday morning soccer runs with the kids to the local park. He was a mid-level manager at a tech company. Nothing flashy, but steady, with a routine that was reliable to the point of monotony. Zoom calls in the morning, a chicken sandwich at noon, and driving home just in time to catch the last yellow light on Ashland Avenue. He wasn't much of a talker, but he was warm. Old friends called him the nice guy. The one who'd help you move, fix your leaky faucet, or babysit your kids if you needed a quiet afternoon. He was the kind of husband the women in their college friend group used to joke was perfect to marry, but not to fantasize about. And somehow, in a strange way, that had become the shadow hanging over his marriage. Lisa, his wife, was the planner. She had planned their wedding, an outdoor ceremony, a honeymoon in Napa, buying their first home near the best elementary school. She was smart, charismatic, admired by friends as one of those women who could be a mom, run a team, and still stay in shape. Mike loved that about her, or he used to. Now he wasn't so sure. Their life ran smoothly, like a well-maintained car. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, both well-behaved and doing great in school. Their backyard was lush with trees, and weekends were often BBQs, board games with friends, or short getaways to Lake Michigan. But there was something unspoken, something even Mike had only recently begun to feel. He was disappearing inside the life he had once dreamed of. Those nights when Lisa was busy texting about work and he was alone on the couch, replaying old games on ESPN with a cold beer in hand. Those were moments no one noticed he was lonely. Not because he was alone, but because he no longer felt like the center of his wife's world. And then came Jenna, Lisa's college friend. Newly divorced, stunning, and more fluent in eye contact than words. There was something about her that made Mike feel seen. Really seen. It was a small feeling, but in a marriage that had become too safe and too silent, it felt enormous. Mike and Lisa had been married 13 years. Their relationship didn't have big blow-ups, no dramatic heartbreak like something out of a soap opera, and definitely no blazing passion like in a romance novel. Everything between them was textbook mature, stable, respectful, raising kids together, filing taxes, planning summer vacations in March. Lisa planned everything. She had Excel sheets for everything, monthly budgets, the kids' school calendars, barbecue menus, even Christmas decorating ideas. Mike admired that about her. But over time, that admiration turned into distance. He felt like a passenger on a ship Lisa was captaining, while his job was simply to keep the wheel from swerving off course. They didn't fight much, actually barely at all. But that only made the quiet between them feel more haunting. Every night after the kids went to bed, Lisa would open her laptop and Mike would turn on the TV. They sat on the same couch but lived in two separate worlds. Some days, he found himself wondering, when was the last time they laughed together? An intimacy? Maybe last month? Or the month before? Lisa was a great mom. The kids adored her, and Mike never doubted her love for the family. But more and more, he felt like she saw him as a co-parent rather than a husband. Not because she didn't love him, but because that love had fractured, divided between the kids, her job, her friends, and her responsibilities. What kept Mike silent wasn't that he didn't notice all this. It was that he had no idea where to begin. Every time he wanted to say something about feeling lonely, about how far apart they'd grown. Lisa was in the middle of a deadline or on a FaceTime call with her mom, or falling asleep on the couch with her Kindle slipping from her hands. Sometimes Mike would reach out and gently touch her back as they lay in bed, hoping to draw her closer. But Lisa would just shift, kiss his shoulder, and whisper, "I'm exhausted. Let's do it tomorrow." There was no harsh rejection, just endless postponement. And Jenna, with her half-playful, half-serious eyes, that low, husky voice, and the way she said Mike's name like she was tasting every syllable, was nothing like Lisa. She had no plans, no spreadsheets, no rushing. With Jenna, everything existed in the moment. And sometimes that moment felt like the only thing a man needed to feel alive. Mike couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the emptiness began. Maybe it was on his 40th birthday, when Lisa threw a small backyard party, invited friends, brought cake and candles, even hung a banner that read Mike's Big 4-0 over the front gate. Everyone was laughing, celebrating, and Lisa was radiant, as always. But all that evening, Mike felt like a supporting character in his own life. He remembered standing by the beer table, drink in hand, watching Lisa chat with an old colleague. She was laughing, eyes lit up, full of life in a way he hadn't seen when it was just the two of them. And in that moment, a heavy realization settled over him. She was happy, but not because of him. They still talked every day about picking up the kids, paying off the credit card, replacing the winter tires. But there were no real conversations anymore. No more late nights lying in bed whispering dreams, plans, or silly, meandering thoughts. Everything had been reduced to efficiency, like two co-workers collaborating to raise kids and keep the house running. Intimacy had become rare, not because one of them refused, but because neither of them asked anymore. Lisa would often say she was tired, or had a headache, or, "It's just been a long week." Mike understood being a mom, a wife, a marketing director wasn't easy. But that understanding slowly turned into resignation, then distance. Some nights, Mike would quietly go up to the roof, crack open a beer, and sit alone under the dim yellow lights. The sound of distant traffic, the dry chill from Lake Michigan. He'd glance through the neighbor's window, where a young couple cooked dinner together, and it felt like he was looking into another life. A life where closeness wasn't a duty, but something natural. Mike had never been the kind of man to cheat. He used to believe loyalty wasn't up for debate. But he came to understand that people don't lose their marriages because of a kiss or a touch. It's because of the long stretches of time where they no longer feel loved, seen, or even real. And it's in that void, where no one shouts, no one storms off, only the silence stretches on, that temptation starts to find its place. Jenna, with her bright eyes, shoulder-length dark brown hair, and a laugh that was part smoky, part playful, was the kind of woman who made men turn their heads. She had been Lisa's close friend in college, roommates in the dorm, wild and inseparable in their 20s. But while Lisa had chosen stability and family, Jenna seemed to have held on to a spark of defiance. She'd been married once. A whirlwind marriage that cracked before it even had time to settle. After her divorce, Jenna moved to Evanston, not far from Chicago, started fresh in interior design, and often joined the college friend gatherings Lisa hosted. The first time Mike really noticed Jenna was at a June barbecue. The sun was blazing, the smell of grilled meat mingling with country music coming from a small speaker near the fence. Jenna stepped into the backyard in a breezy sky blue silk dress and oversized sunglasses. She hugged Lisa, laughed loudly, then turned to Mike. "Hey Mike, finally meet again," she said, her voice teasing. He couldn't even remember the last time they'd actually talked. From that moment on, Jenna always seemed to be a little closer to Mike than the others. While the rest chatted about kids, schools, real estate, Jenna asked things no one else did anymore. "Do you still draw?" Lisa said you studied art your freshman year. Or, "If you weren't a manager, what do you think you'd be doing?" Harmless questions on the surface, but they made Mike feel seen, heard, remembered, not just for his role, but for who he was. One time, at a friend's party, Mike stepped out onto the porch for a smoke, and Jenna was already there. She reached for his lighter, her fingers brushing his. A touch that was brief, unintentional, but enough to make his skin burn. She didn't flirt overtly. Jenna didn't need to. Her presence, free-spirited, a little wild, a little untamed, felt like air to someone like Mike, who was suffocating in a life too neatly packaged. And slowly, not entirely consciously, but not entirely by accident either, Mike began to look for her at every gathering. He probably knew this was dangerous, but in a world where he was becoming more and more invisible to his wife, Jenna was like a spotlight, reminding him that he was still alive, still capable of making someone laugh, of being listened to. Nothing explicit was said between them, but after each encounter, those glances that lasted just a bit too long, the fleeting touches, the casual messages afterward, something unspoken began to grow. A quiet undercurrent, running through every meeting, every good night text at midnight. One late afternoon in early July, Jenna texted, "If you're looking for a quiet cafe to work, try the Green Cup on Lincoln Avenue. I go there sometimes." The message was light, casual, almost innocent, but Mike understood. And just as she'd hoped, 3 days later, he walked in and saw her there, alone, laptop open, hair in a loose bun, the late sun catching her cheekbones and making her look soft, impossibly close. "What a coincidence," she smiled when she saw him. Mike just smiled back. No need for words. They sat together, ordered coffee, pretended to work. But neither of them could focus. There was a tension between them, like a tight wire stretched to its limit, one gnawed away from snapping. That night, Mike came home late. Lisa was folding laundry in the bedroom, asked if he was hungry, while their youngest had already gone to bed. Mike looked at his wife, her hair tied up, old t-shirt stretched at the collar, and felt guilty for thinking about Jenna just minutes earlier, and maybe even right then. But that guilt came tangled with a thirst, a deep longing to be wanted, to be seen, to be looked at like he still mattered. The texts between Mike and Jenna became more frequent, no longer just about coffee or work. Jenna wrote about sleepless nights, the doubts she still carried post-divorce. Mike shared about quiet mornings when Lisa was still asleep and he made coffee alone. Beneath every word, there was an unspoken layer, yet both understood perfectly. The turning point came at a small backyard party. Lisa had gone inside to grab ice, and Mike and Jenna stood alone in the corner of the yard. She leaned in slightly and asked, "Do you ever wonder if things had been different, what we might have been?" Mike didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, then gave a slow, heavy nod. "Honest." From that moment, the blurry line between my wife's friend and the woman who keeps me up at night was gone. They hadn't done anything yet, but the emotional betrayal had long since begun. That Saturday afternoon, Lisa took the kids to visit her parents in Wisconsin, as she did every few months. Mike said he had a deadline and needed to stay in Chicago. Lisa believed him. She always did. Jenna knew he'd be home alone. She didn't plan anything specific, just sent a short message that morning. If you're in the mood for an uninterrupted afternoon, I'm making pizza. Mike read it while brewing his coffee. His hand paused mid-motion. He knew he shouldn't go, but he also knew if not today then someday soon. And he was tired of fighting himself. Jenna lived in a third-floor loft apartment, with a small balcony overlooking the street. When Mike arrived, she was wearing a thin beige sweater, no bra and fitted jeans. The scent of oregano and basil from the kitchen mingled with the hint of magnolia perfume on her wrist. The apartment was warm, the lighting soft, jazz playing quietly from a speaker by the stove, as if this place didn't belong to the noisy world outside. Pizza'll be ready in 10 minutes, Jenna said, handing him a glass of wine. Mike sank into the sofa. She sat close beside him, her head slightly tilted. They had never been this close before. The first time she touched him was to pick a stray hair off his shirt. Her fingers were slender and cool, but the touch sent heat rushing through his skin. Mike turned to look at her, and that look, without a single word, was all it took for Jenna to press her lips to his. The first kiss was a blur of fear, desire, and release, like they'd been holding a door shut for too long, and now all it needed was a gentle push. Jenna climbed into his lap, her hands slipping under his shirt, fingertips trailing down his spine, making him shiver. He could feel her breath quicken, smell the sun-warmed scent of her hair, her cool, soft skin pressing against his. They didn't rush. They wanted to remember everything. The sweater fell to the floor, followed by the jeans. Mike let his hands explore her curves, the tiny scar along her ribcage. She gasped softly when he kissed the hollow of her neck, where her pulse beat fast. In that moment, there was no wife, no husband. Only two lonely people fitting into each other like mismatched puzzle pieces that somehow belonged. When it was over, Jenna lay with her head on his chest, hair falling across his shoulder, her eyes half closed. The pizza had gone cold. Half a glass of wine still sat untouched. Mike didn't say a word. He knew something in his life had shifted, into a chapter he wasn't sure he could control. From that fateful afternoon, Mike and Jenna stepped into a dangerous gray zone, where every kiss, every text, every glance held equal parts thrill and dread. They didn't need to define it. It was obvious in the way he held her hand just a bit longer, in the way she slipped a spare key into the pocket of his coat without explanation. They became secretive. Mike started using excuses, meeting a client, working late at the office. Jenna stopped inviting friends over on weekends. Her apartment became a refuge, a place where Mike could shed the roles of father and husband and just be a man who was wanted. One Wednesday morning, after Lisa had left to take the kids to school, Mike said he was going for a run. Instead, he drove straight to Jenna's. She opened the door wrapped in a towel, hair still damp, and her smile was the thing he'd been craving after too many sleepless nights lying next to his wife. They made love on the sofa, sunlight slanting through the blinds, casting shadows across Jenna's bare back as she moved above him, each rhythm like a secret melody. The scent of skin, the breathless moans, the creaking of floorboards, all of it etched into his memory like a film only the two of them could watch. At first, it was just quick visits. But soon, they began having lunch together, taking long drives to quiet suburbs just to sit on a park bench, fingers intertwined. Once, they rented a small motel room in Wisconsin while Lisa took the kids to visit her mother. Mike sat on the hotel bed, watching Jenna emerge from the bathroom, wrapped in a thin towel, hair dripping wet. In that moment, he whispered, "I wish we had met sooner." Jenna was quiet. Then she said, without meeting his eyes, "Maybe you wouldn't have chosen me then." They never talked about the future. They lived in stolen moments, in hugs shared in shadows, in midnight texts that said, "Miss you." But when Mike started deleting messages every morning, checking the home cameras more carefully, avoiding Lisa's eyes when she asked, "How was your day?" he knew passion always comes at a price. Every morning, Mike watched Lisa slicing fruit for the kids, her hair tied neatly at the nape, pajamas still holding the familiar scent of detergent, and felt a heavy ache settle in his chest. She was still the woman he had once loved fiercely, the one who stayed up nursing him through pneumonia, who cried when they found out she was pregnant for the first time, who still asked, "What did you have for lunch?" like it was second nature. And now he was the one betraying her. Quietly, deliberately, repeatedly. At first, Mike believed he could manage it. Just one small corner of life. A place to breathe. But it wasn't that simple anymore. Every night beside Lisa felt like a glass wall had risen between them. She didn't know, but he did. And that knowledge gnawed at him from the inside out. One day, Jenna texted, "I feel like a substitute. Am I just your escape?" Mike stared at the message for hours without replying. Because he wasn't sure. Maybe Jenna was right. Or maybe deep down he really did want her. Not just because she was sexy or available, but because she made him feel alive, anticipated, touched like it was always the first time. He began having dreams, Lisa finding out, nightmares of tears and shattering. Some nights he woke up in a cold sweat, turning to hold his wife. Lisa would stir, then drift back to sleep. He would kiss her forehead and whisper, "I'm sorry," though she had no idea why. At dinner with the family, Jenna's name would sometimes come up. Lisa would reminisce about their college years, about late-night heart-to-hearts, about how Jenna once consoled her after a bad breakup. Mike would force a smile, hiding the storm in his eyes. The real conflict wasn't just about love. It was about Mike losing himself. He felt like a liar, and yet also drawn by a force his logic couldn't resist. He began to think about endings. But what exactly would he end? The affair with Jenna, or the marriage with Lisa? Either way, there would be consequences. And Mike, the man who was once rational, steady, dependable, now felt lost in his own life, unsure of where the exit was. That night, Lisa just needed to borrow Mike's phone to call her mom. Hers was charging in the bedroom, and Mike was in the shower. It wasn't a big deal. She often used his phone for Google Maps or to order takeout. But when Lisa picked it up and unlocked the screen, the message glowing at the top stopped her cold. "Your scent's still on my pillow. I miss you." From Jenna. Her hand froze. Her heart clenched like it had been seized by something icy and merciless. Lisa stared at the words, her mind spinning. She had never been the suspicious type. Mike was quiet, reliable, not talkative, but always solid. She had trusted him. Completely. Which made that message, from Jenna, her closest friend, the one who drank wine with her on birthdays, who once slept over after a backyard barbecue, feel like a blade to the one part of her that had never built up armor. She unlocked the phone. Her hands were trembling. The passcode was their eldest child's birthday, something she had never needed to use before. But this time she typed it in. The messages appeared like shards falling from a mask she had always believed was real. "Do you still have that red dress? I was soaking wet just thinking about last night. I wish you were here right now." Lisa collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the tile with a dull, lifeless sound. She couldn't breathe. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Images flashed before her eyes like a fast-forwarded film. Mike stepping out during lunch breaks, Jenna visiting less and less, and the way they used to look at each other. Something she had once brushed off as close friends. No, it couldn't be. She couldn't be wrong. She wasn't allowed to be wrong. Mike came out of the bathroom, towel in hand, drying his hair. Then he saw her, sitting there, pale as a ghost. And then he saw the phone on the floor, still lit. A message on the screen burning like a carving into stone. "I still smell you on my pillow. I miss you." Lisa's eyes lifted to meet his, bloodshot and full of fire. Her voice cracked but came out clear. "How long, Mike? Since when have you been sleeping with my best friend?" The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained, counting down the collapse of a family. Mike froze, towel still in his hands, water dripping to the floor. Lisa stood up, her body trembling as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Her eyes were red, angry, heartbroken, and most painfully, disbelieving. "I'm asking you one more time," she said, voice shaking. "How long? And why her?" Mike swallowed hard. Every explanation, every "I'm sorry" choked in his throat. He had thought he might be prepared for this moment, the moment Lisa found out. But he wasn't. Nothing could have prepared him for the devastation in her eyes. The eyes of a woman who had once trusted him completely. It was just once. In the beginning, Mike said, looking away. After that last party. I don't know why. It just happened. Lisa laughed, dry and sharp, with not a trace of humor. Just once? She said. She picked up the phone, held it up to him, scrolled quickly, and read aloud. I'm not wearing anything under my coat. The hotel room smelled like your skin all day. We need one full night. Not just these stolen moments. Just once, Mike? This is your version of just once? Mike clenched his fists. I don't know what to say. I didn't mean for it to become this. I tried to stop. So many times. Lisa stepped closer, now just an arm's length away. Do you know what hurts the most? Not that you cheated, but that you chose her. Jenna, the woman I called my best friend. The one who watched our kids for us. Who held me when my dad died. She knew everything about our marriage, and still chose to sleep with you. Mike looked at her, and for the first time in years he felt afraid. Not afraid of being abandoned. Not of losing the house. But afraid of losing Lisa, the woman he had thought he knew so well, now a stranger. Fierce, resolute, and utterly out of reach. I don't know whether to slap you or just sit down and cry, Lisa said, her lip quivering. But I do know this. From this moment on, I will never look at you the same way again. The air between them was thick, frozen. No more words were exchanged. Just two people, their hearts shattered, standing in the wreckage of a trust that had just imploded. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She sat alone on the sofa, a thin blanket draped over her shoulders, eyes staring blankly at the window where the cold orange glow of the street lamps spilled in. Beside her, a half-empty glass of red wine. Her mind, though, was wide awake. Everything in the house looked the same. The bookshelf Mike still hadn't organized. Their wedding photo hanging in the hallway. The steady tick of the familiar clock. But to Lisa, it all felt changed. Mike slept in the small guest room in the basement. Not because she had asked him to leave, but because he knew he no longer belonged in the room they once shared. By morning, Lisa came downstairs with a small suitcase. Her clothes were simple. Her face looked drained, but her eyes were steady. Mike was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. Where are you going? He asked, voice low and laced with fear, but he didn't dare try to stop her. My mom's. Just for a few days, she said flatly. I need to think. Mike nodded. He wanted to say something, but didn't. No apology could undo the damage. No explanation could justify betraying the woman who had shared nearly 2 decades of life with him. Lisa walked to the door but paused at the threshold. Without turning around, she said, I don't know how this ends, but I know one thing. I can't keep living like nothing happened, pretending you're still the man I used to believe in. Mike lowered his head. I understand. No, Lisa replied, turning to face him this time, her eyes dry and hard. You don't. You don't understand what it's like to lose your best friend and your husband in the same night. The door closed quietly behind her. No screaming, no shattering glass. Just a silence so heavy it felt like the last line of a chapter that had finally closed. In the car, as she drove through the familiar streets, Lisa felt something fall away from her. Maybe the pain, maybe the last thread of hope. She didn't know if she could forgive. She didn't know if this marriage could be saved. But she knew this. She had to rise. She had to stand. And she had to protect what was left of her heart. The house, after that, became so quiet that it drove Mike mad. Mornings that were once filled with the sound of coffee brewing, Lisa reminding him not to forget his jacket, or their light-hearted debates over the morning news, were now filled only with the wind slipping through a window not fully closed. The table for two now sat empty. Mike still took his usual seat, but no one sat across from him. He ate less, slept poorly. Every day he found himself standing too long in front of the wedding photo on the wall. Lisa in her white dress, smiling so radiantly, her eyes full of hope. Mike couldn't remember the last time she looked at him that way. Meanwhile, Lisa was staying at her mother's house in Evanston, a small place near Lake Michigan, where she had grown up. At first, her mother didn't ask anything. She just held her tight when she saw the puffiness in Lisa's eyes. But later that evening, after dinner, when it was just the two of them, her mother gently asked, "What are you planning to do next?" Lisa didn't answer right away. Her mother knew her well. She needed time and space. A few days later, Lisa returned to work at the high school where she taught literature. In class, she delivered Shakespeare lectures with quiet composure, though her eyes often drifted off while students bent over their writing. During lunch, she sat alone in her car, played old music, and replayed the tiniest memories of their life together. How Mike tied his shoelaces, how he nodded off during movies, the scent of his cologne every morning. One day, Mike sent her an email. No apology, no excuses, just this: "I'm learning how to live without you, and it hurts more than any punishment. If there's ever a chance to do even one part over, I'd take it with both hands." Lisa read it, closed her laptop, and didn't reply. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew this. She was exactly where she needed to be, away from the wreckage, in a space to find herself again. Word of what happened between Mike, Lisa, and Jenna spread like wildfire through dry forest. No one ever said it outright, but somehow everyone in their old friend group, the same people who used to gather around summer BBQs with beers and laughter, found out. A screenshot of Lisa's texts with a close friend had been accidentally shared and then forwarded. From there, the phone calls started, the whispers circulated, and silence crept in. Lisa never heard from Jenna. No apology, no explanation. Jenna vanished from the group hangouts, deleted her old Instagram, and started a new one. Private, quiet, distant. In a friend circle that had stayed close for nearly 2 decades, this felt like a massive rupture. Some people, like Monica and Dan, stood firmly by Lisa, expressing outrage not just toward Jenna, but Mike too. "She was your best friend." Unbelievable, Monica messaged, then invited Lisa out for coffee as often as possible. Those coffee dates became a safe space for Lisa to drop the brave face and allow herself to break a little. But there were also people who tried to stay neutral, like Kyle and Sarah, saying they couldn't pick sides because "you're both our friends." To Lisa, that neutrality stung almost as much as betrayal. Mike's experience was different. He was practically exiled from the group. No more texts inviting him to Sunday basketball. No more birthday party invites for their kids. Even Chris, one of his oldest friends and a groomsman at their wedding, messaged bluntly, "You did this to Lisa, to Jenna. You think we're just gonna stand by? Don't contact me again." Mike read the message, then deleted it. But the wound remained. Even their families couldn't keep it civil. Lisa's mother, who had always kept a polite distance from her son-in-law, cut him off entirely. "I don't want to see your face near my daughter again," she said in a short, tense phone call. Mike's parents, who lived out in the Naperville suburbs, could only sigh. "You screwed up," his father said. "But we're adults. Now you've got to own it." The relationships that once made up the foundation of their life now felt like walls, built brick by brick from disappointment, hurt, and broken trust. And while Lisa was slowly constructing a new circle of safety for herself, Mike remained on the outside, still searching for a door that had long since closed. Some nights, Lisa would sit alone on the porch at her mother's house, wrapped in a thin blanket, a mug of ginger tea in hand, gazing out at the heavy darkness in the backyard. These weren't tearful nights like the early weeks. Now, in the quiet, she could hear even the smallest sounds, the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the deeper voice within herself. She started journaling again, not to preserve memories, but to understand herself better. She wrote about the years with Mike, the good things, the overlooked things, and the subtle cracks they'd both ignored. She realized the breakdown hadn't started with Jenna. It had started with the growing distance between her and Mike, a crack that widened like concrete splitting under winter frost. But the betrayal by Jenna, that was what shattered her trust the most. Not just the physical affair, but the way Jenna, the one who had stood beside her at the wedding, who had held her hair back when she was mourning sick, now turned away in silence as if nothing had happened. That silence hurt more than any lie. Meanwhile, Mike lived like a ghost. Some nights he sat alone in the living room, a bottle of whiskey on the table, the TV on with no sound. He reread old texts from Lisa, wondering what had caused him to spiral so far. He thought back to the first moment with Jenna, the feeling of being desired, of being heard, but now it was all ash. The fire was gone. Only smoke remained, stinging his eyes, clinging to the room with the smell of regret. Mike started going to therapy, once a week. At first, he just sat there in silence. But over time, through each question, he was forced to confront the parts of himself he'd avoided for years. His insecurities, his fear of abandonment, and the ego that kept him from saying, "I need you," to the woman he loved. He didn't know if Lisa would forgive him, or ever come back. But the first thing he learned was this: he had to be honest with himself. As for Lisa, she came to understand one thing through it all. Loss taught her how to be grateful for what she once had. Not to cling to the past, but to move forward, steadier than before. They were no longer who they used to be, but maybe they were becoming clearer, more honest versions of themselves. Each on their own path, each carrying a quiet, lasting lesson. A year after Lisa moved out of the house she'd shared with Mike, summer returned to Chicago in golden afternoons and the sound of kids laughing over backyard fences. Her new apartment was on the second floor of a small walk-up near Lincoln Park. Not big, but bright and leafy, with a small balcony where she kept pots of lavender, rosemary, and mint, the kind of scents that helped her breathe easier in the mornings. Lisa had settled into a new rhythm. She still worked regularly at the dental clinic, but her weekends were different now. She joined an outdoor yoga class, took an Italian cooking course at the community center, and every now and then hosted wine and talk nights with Monica, her unwavering friend. She wasn't dating seriously yet, but she allowed herself to laugh more, to open up a little. Not because she needed someone, but because she finally believed she was still worthy of being loved. For Mike, things weren't as smooth. After Lisa left, he tried to win her back. A few calls, some texts, flowers sent to her office. But when every door stayed closed, he went quiet. He moved into a studio apartment near the harbor, where he started writing again, not fiction but journals. Just enough to keep himself steady.